Welcome everyone to this. There we are. Welcome to this very special roundtable on systemic functional linguistics and transdisciplinarity. And today we've brought together researchers working between different disciplines and across different linguistic theories, and also working out of different countries. I've counted at least 7 today, and also working out of different time zones. We've scheduled this early evening here in Europe so that it's compatible with the US East Coast, notably. I'll be very brief in introducing our wonderful panel, our wonderful group of guest panelists. First of all, so in order of appearance, in view of the questions that we've planned, Anne Charity Hudley is Professor of Education and Associate Dean of Educational Affairs at Stanford. She specialized in language issues in the field of education and what we call in ESFLA a fellow traveler. So in that she is not an SFL person as such, but she shares similar interests and similar stakes when it comes to the study of language. Fatma Benelhadj is Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of Sfax in Tunisia. She's a specialist in cognitive linguistics, including conceptual metaphor. Arran Stibbe is Professor of Narrative Ecology at the University of Gloucestershire and a specialist in eco-linguistics. Elke Teich is Professor of English Linguistics and Translation Studies at Saarland University, and she combines linguistics with theory in communication and information sciences. And so that's our panelists. And asking the questions today, we have the editors of the recently published Routledge Handbook of Transdisciplinary Systemic Functional Linguistics. First of all, Lise Fontaine, who's Professor of Linguistics at the Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières, so in Canada. Anne McCabe is Professor Emerita of English at St. Louis University in Madrid. Akila Sellami Baklouti is Professor of English Language and Linguistics at the University of Sfax in Tunisia. And finally, Rebekah Wegener is Associate Professor in English and Applied Linguistics at the University of Salzburg in Austria. So before handing the floor over to the editors of this special edition from Routledge, I'll just specify that in terms of, we will open the floor to questions from our members of the audience at the end of the panel discussion. And because of the number of panelists, we ask that exceptionally today, your questions be placed in the chat and we will read them out for you. And so without further ado, I'd like to now hand the floor over to Lise Fontaine.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And I can't begin without saying how happy I feel to see so many friends and familiar faces, people I've had the privilege of meeting in person or online. And it's actually a great honor for me to be asking the questions to Anne, because Anne, we've never met, and you said yes when we invited, and I came to know Anne's work a number of years ago when I was working on the Oxford Companion to the English Language, and I was searching for women making contribution to the English language, and there she was, and I'm actually pleased to get to see you in person, even though we're online. Maybe our paths will cross in physical space one day. Okay, so without further ado, as we say, I'm going to start with our first question. And when we were preparing this volume, we really liked your 2023 paper, Language Across the Disciplines. And in particular, we were drawn to the following statement. So I'll just quote from that paper. Research at the intersections of the cognitive, computational, and social is currently some of the most innovative and most pressingly needed. That research can potentially change how we think about language, its impact on humanity, and how we structure society. So, in your experience, what makes the intersection that you talk about feel particularly urgent to you right now? And does this sense of urgency bring any opportunities or challenges?
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's such an honor to be here with y'all today. I'm super honored how you took up this work for this conversation and also in your amazing handbook. And I will just say the sense of urgency is so real for me right now. I'll just share a little bit.
Hi, sir. No, they're fine.
Somebody needs to mute their microphone, or maybe Anne, you can do that. Sorry, Anne, please continue.
Oh, no worries. Okay. Just from the longer quote, I teach a lot of students their first linguistics course. So thinking about how do we get into this work. And so what really inspired me in the quote you read, Lise, was the way that we had devised how to explain what linguistics is to incoming students at the College of William and Mary. And the idea is that language is fundamentally a human aspect, right? It is really thinking about who we are as people and how our minds and socialization work. Right now, we are on such angle of really thinking about how in this AI climate, the cognitive and social are really in danger of getting lost in this big change that we have going on right now. So I reached out to my colleague, Daniel Villarreal, to really think about, where have things changed or what looks the same since we wrote the paper? And just really thinking about, are we confronting a time in history where now thinking, communicating is not just a specific human situation, right? What is that going to mean? And what will it mean for humans to do that versus what will it mean for machines and computers to do this? We know that they don't have the same mental models. We're not saying at all that they're the same, but how will that help us understand what humans do specifically and what will happen in computational linguistics? I think this is really important for us to think about, what we're really facing and where will the social come in? Where will our humanity kind of play a role in that? I think this is really important from an angle of thinking about those of us who study language, right? Those of us who see ourselves as linguists, we are going to have to confront the different ways that people are now studying language that are important and popular. So I talk a lot about how, right, we have linguistics as an area, but now we have computational linguistics taking on a world of its own. We have psycholinguistics taking on a world of its own. We've always had people study linguistics and language from a more humanistic language literacy culture model. We need to be thinking very deeply about how we're engaging with these different groups and what does our particular lens really bring to bear that's important that will be lost if we're not in these conversations. So I see this as a really important active time for linguists to be thinking about larger conversations, team science. I'm going to give you all examples today from work that we are actively doing. So in our, we got a grant from the National Science Foundation before they kind of messed everything up and changed everything. So this grant was about 4 or 5 years ago. And the directive's mission was to really think about how can you build and broaden, that's the name of the directive, a larger focus of science in your area. So our argument was we need to build a bigger and broader linguistics for the sake of linguistic science. So that was really important. The infrastructure lens was like, what are the areas that you're not in conversation with, and how do you actively make a larger conversation? So we met with a group of scholars. There were about 20 of us who met regularly for 3 years. And we worked on the areas of kind of thinking about Black language and culture and the ways linguists study it in all its incantations to build what we were calling a bigger and Blacker linguistics, right? The idea being that linguistics is also not very diverse. It does not include a lot of people from the Black diaspora, not just in the United States, but across the world. What would it take for active scholars, who we know there are many Black scholars who are interested in language, to engage with that that sliver of people who are studying language that see themselves as kind of linguists, especially Linguistic Society of America type linguists. And so I really like to see in your handbook and how you also took up the work of my dear and really one of my oldest friends in linguistics, Becky Childs. And Becky is on the call. I'm sure she's here. Becky and I feel like Becky and I have been talking about this issue since 1999. So I'm sure that might be before some of the people on this call were even born. Is that the reason that we came to linguistics as Southern women, right? So thinking about the history of the US South and the challenges that we face from enslavement through Reconstruction and Jim Crow, like why were we even spending our lives doing linguistics? It was because we thought that there's such urgent questions and issues in that Southern lens, both for white Southerners and Black Southerners, that linguistics can bring to bear. So I think this is really important for us because if we're going to address some of the biggest challenges of our time, whether it be what is happening with AI in the next, 6 months, it seems like it changes every 6 months. How are we addressing these savage inequalities that were kind of brought about by enslavement and the history and the challenges that we still face in the United States with just abject racism that informs our daily lives? We have got to make sure that the work we're doing addresses these issues. And our lens is that by taking on these challenges and problems, our research, our theories will be even stronger. And so this is something that we really think about. We are in a moment of great change, social, cognitive, that we can be a part of, but we have got to think about how we structure the conversation. But I really see this as an opportunity to redefine what linguistics is. And my argument with that is that this will take active work, maybe skills that we'll have to develop that are outside of the traditional research and writing skills that linguists hold. We've been doing that as we developed the new Journal of Black Language and Culture, which is now a new journal for the Linguistic Society of America. We're acquiring articles right now, and the first articles will come out this fall. But to make that conversation transdisciplinary, we've had to reach out, right, to disciplinary societies like yourself to really think about scholars who are doing amazing work but don't necessarily call or see themselves as linguists. We've planned and hosted retreats. We've done tons of Zoom and in-person conferences, going to conferences that are not usually in our general, routine of like who would we usually be talking to. Lots of email, lots of social media, taking on these opportunities and making part of the key rubrics for the journal, having the authors articulate how their work will be of interest to a transdisciplinary readership, right? So that's something that we've seen from our own experiences in a life of linguistics as being very different. The previous strategy in linguistics was to think about really defining who is a linguist, being sometimes a little bit narrow about this. Oh, this person's not really a linguist. Oh, they don't study language the way that we do, right? As being the thing that would save linguistics or make it strong. Many programs, for example, in the United States, when we look at studies of just like what students are encouraged to take, many linguistics programs are like, oh, you have to take classes in our department, our program, like be really narrow. I was even told that myself as a doctoral student, right? The more linguistics classes you take are better. And our argument, what we're saying is, no, you've got to really be broad. You've got to really be clever about thinking about the ways that you can be in conversation with different people, with different focus. And this has always been a tenet, I would say, here at Stanford. And I saw that you all quoted my good friends and colleagues, former student Taylor Lakowski. He was working on that paper in one of my classes, Lakowski and McFarland, 2002. That really argues like, hey, linguists, right? Linguistics is not always just happening inside linguistics departments. Linguistics departments in the United States are actually getting smaller. Their budgets are getting cut. A lot of things are getting shrunk down, right? So pay attention to this and really think about how broad the study of language is to make what we're doing richer and to get rid of this linguistic silo hierarchy, right? That only linguists are found in one place. So this is why I think that, really thinking about having these conversations as an active moment thinking about how important this is to what's going on in society right now, and helping us redefine in this broader transdisciplinary way, like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to talk or communicate? What does it mean to think, and how that's going to look different, right, as our new computational models look different? We can lead that conversation if we have planning. I think that has to happen right now, or we can kind of follow those conversations if we don't have that planning, and then linguistic richness that we can bring to those conversations will be either ignored or seen as trivial, or not get the funding and the disciplinary support that it needs. So that's why I think this is so important. And I will mention that that paper that I wrote with Dan Villarreal and Eris Clemons was the launch of that grant, the Build and Broaden Conversation. So it's just amazing to me. And I'm so happy that we're taking it up in that way, because we wrote that paper with the mind to kind of think about how can we make linguistics bigger and broader.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go to my next question, but I think you've already kind of touched on you've kind of already touched on some of the things that this question is asking, but I think we can go a little bit deeper into that. So I'll read the question that I prepared in any case. But yeah, so we've organized this forum largely for linguists, by linguists, and we just published this handbook, the Routledge Handbook. For me, I mean, the title is not ideal from some obvious reasons and for some less obvious reasons, but if we think more broadly, where does linguistics sit within transdisciplinary research generally? Is there anything distinctive about what linguistics brings or what it needs to address compared to other disciplines?
Right. Great. This question is so important and has really been framing the work that we're doing. But I also want to back it up a little bit. Something that we found that was really important when we were writing the Oxford Handbook on Inclusion in Linguistics and the Oxford Handbook on Decolonizing Linguistics, and those are open access. So if you Google it, if you haven't seen them yet, you can find them and look. Was really thinking about, hey, you know what? This is a good time to think about who decided and who decides what linguistics is. All right. And so the idea is not just kind of joining the conversation where we are, but backing it way up and saying that how are we really framing the study of language as a social science based on this history? And how do we think about what linguistics is really thinking about who are we privileging in linguistics, whose voices are being heard, whose work is being held up as the most important work, and why do we privilege it? And so I think that's really important for us to think about. Linguistics has been one of the more predominantly kind of white, male, narrow-led disciplines for a while. And as we see on this call, now we've been definitely have some gender balance in linguistics, but we want to be careful not to be assimilatory with the work we do going forward, right? So we don't want to just kind of see how we can do the best work in these frameworks and the paradigms that have been presented to us. We want to think about how we can smash those paradigms and create something new. So I really think that the way that we have to think about this question is, how do we redirect or how do we recorrect some of the kind of challenges or issues that we've seen in the past to do a broader linguistics? I think it's going to be really important for us to really get away from thinking about just having, in the United States, we have a big focus on, oh, we're going to really show the value of linguistics if we just frame it as a science, right? And we say it is a scientific study of language, right? This is a big thing that the NSF values. And so then people took it up in their departments and programs. And it really kind of made people who were not seeing themselves as a scientist, if you saw yourself more as a humanist or an educator, or maybe you saw your social science to be more to the humanistic side, it really pushed a lot of people away from linguistics. Historically, we had the big split between the Linguistic Society of America and the Association for Applied Linguistics, right? That was the kind of historical split, so that if you saw yourself as more in education or focusing applied linguistics, you weren't pushing theory, you weren't advancing things. And now I've really, in this work that I've done, especially in the last 5 years, come to see a lot of other people who define themselves not just as being a linguist, but being not a linguist. This is not the time for that, right? I'm going to share this with you all if I can. Yep, share screen. Here we go. To say that we are in a time of crisis here in the United States, but I would argue a little bit around the world. What we need to be thinking about is doing language as a matter of survival, right? And so then how will we organize ourselves if we're seeing this work as survival? We have widespread banning of books in the United States, bigger than we've ever seen in my lifetime. We've got educators afraid to broach topics of thinking about race, immigration, multilingualism, which makes it hard to even find ourselves in places to have discussions about language in ways that are fruitful and really bring to bear on people's lives, whether it be in education or healthcare, places where we really need support. Anti-DEI legislation. So we've seen the end of affirmative action policies and procedures and laws that were meant to support people who are marginalized, racialized, or put on the edges of our society based on their language. This is work that took generations to bring about and to make change. And we're seeing the widespread devaluation of higher education and closure of language and linguistics programs, right? Where our most vulnerable students never had access to these programs. We're seeing those losses for everyone. So I say this is to say, if we keep on with our whole little kind of conversation about what will linguistics bring as the discipline as it stands now, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. I mean, we're seeing this, right? People are losing their budget. A lot of the major programs are either suspending admissions, even for their doctoral students. We should really be asking, what does linguistics need to be relevant to these conversations, to be important in policy and procedure? And that means we're going to have to let go of how we were educated a lot and how we were socialized to kind of think about. And these narrow little nerdy kind of caverns that we've created for ourselves where we feel safe and our work feels valued, we're going to have to push our work even further. That's why I really love being in this big major ed school right now. It is challenging me to think about, what I hold dear as a linguist and what am I going to let go so that my students, my colleagues, the policymakers, the people around me who could really take this information and do something big with it on a national or a global scale. How am I going to have to change my messaging? How am I going to have to change my methodologies, right? And how I think of my work. When I started in linguistics, for example, I never thought I'd be part of things like large-scale randomized controlled trials. But doing this work in ways to make sure that work around healthcare and language and communication is not just good work, but it's work that's taken up by healthcare makers, policymakers, physicians, clinicians. That's what it's pushed me to. So I think that's what we really have to think about, is not losing what we know we've created and hold dear, but we're going to have to think about questions about how do we make our work and our discipline more relevant and how that's going to fundamentally change what we're doing. And so the second part of our research from the Build and Broaden group really challenged some of our newest assistant professors, who are in what in the United States we call Research 1 or highest productive universities, to think about how they were going to take these questions up at the beginning of their career. So not just at the end of their career when they're saying, okay, I can play around things now, but how are they going to fundamentally make the most essential work of their careers important? And so this book just came out, and the questions that we had are, I think they're relevant for everyone. We made them Black-centered because, again, this work was really to think about how to do this work to make linguistics a place that Black scholars would want to be in conversation. So not just recruiting people in a seminary model, but to say, okay, there are amazing Black scholars in the world. How do they make them think that linguistics is relevant, right? So how do we think about our use of in our teaching, our research, and our service, and our outreach, right? How do we make that relevant even for the scholars that are existent? I want to share with you one quote in particular. I'll just give you this. We did interviews with scholars. We did 44 interviews. Most of the hour were 1 to 2 hours. And these were of scholars who see themselves as studying language, but not necessarily who saw themselves as linguistics, right? So 44 may sound small, but actually it's a lot when you get down to talking to a whole bunch of faculty about their careers. This is what we saw from that population. People saw linguistics as a tool to explore their culture, to be part of conversations, to think about their worthiness, right, in their own identity and language and culture. People thought about this, again, from this essential that people's lives are in danger. We are talking about people who are losing their lives. It may, we're thinking about big issues in communities, heart disease, gun death. People are dying because of linguistic discrimination, right? And the idea here is that we don't need to be insular. We need to be talking to as many individuals about the ways that language plays a role in our survival as possible, right? So these are quotes. And this one here is that we've got to confront the history of white supremacy in linguistics in the ways that it is defined what is linguistics and who are linguists. And we've got to really think about the ways that the intelligence, the passion, the expertise, the skills of other scholars have to be brought to bear in what we're doing. The idea is that we cannot afford to lose another generation of diversity in linguistics. We will be even more tangential and even more irrelevant. So I'm going to really show you so all of this work was influenced by my former professor, Bert Box. Bert Box is now professor at Cambridge University. He's an Armenian dialectologist and a phonologist, kind of by renown in linguistics. But he's been really pushing these issues across his career. And when I was an undergrad at Harvard, taught the biggest course at Harvard, and it was on dialects of English, right? So what I got to see is how this work that I love with, just unabashed passion was made relevant to so many students, so many scholars, people who've gone on to be leaders in our community and in the world, right? From this really privileged position they had as Harvard undergraduates. And he gave me this chart by Trower and Chait and said, look, Anne, if we're going to make linguistics survive and be relevant and be something that we can all be proud of, we're going to have to think about what we value. And I think the biggest answers to you all's questions today, this idea is that a new view of higher education and what research could be in its higher form is that we're really going to have to say, look, we're going to have to organize research around problems and not just around disciplines or this idea that theory will move the discipline or move the questions. We're going to have to think that we have a collective responsibility to each other, to society, right, to our students, in a way that's not just privileging abstract theory and linguistics, that is really closed off to a small group. So I think it's the urgency that's going to push us forward, that's going to make us think about what linguistics not just is, but what it can be in the next 50 to 100 years.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that response.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, lots to think about there.
Yeah.
Definitely lots to think about. We'll move on now to our next guest speaker, but I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of what you've mentioned when we go to the final discussion. So Fatma, welcome. Nice to see you. It was wonderful working with you on your chapter for the Transdisciplinary Handbook. And I think it's great. Anne just mentioned that we need to get beyond our silos, that people thinking that the way they do linguistics is the most important. I will say, I think systemic functional linguistics scholars can be accused of this sometimes. So I'm particularly happy to think about your chapter on conceptual metaphor between universality and variation, which was included in a section on the individual, thinking about our ways of cognition, our ways of thinking. And your chapter brings together cognitive linguistics with systemic functional linguistics, particularly around embodiment and context. So yeah, just what challenges did you find in bringing together these two different silos, in a way, these two different worlds of linguistics, given their different assumptions about where meaning resides? One is in cognition and the other is in social context. So over to you, Fatma.
Thank you, Anne. I would like first to thank you for all the time periods we spent working on the chapter. It was very interesting discussing with you all the topics we had in the chapter, and I also wanted to thank also all the editors because I think the volume is really wonderful. Well, Yes, SFL and cognitive linguistics might sound two things which are really far away from each other. And the idea was actually I was from the beginning an SFLer, so my PhD was in SFL. And then I came into teaching cognitive linguistics and I started comparing and contrasting and thinking about differences between the two frameworks. So basically, and actually the chapter was a kind of gift to me to try to answer this question. The idea is that we think that in SFL, so basically meaning making is social. So we, as human beings, we communicate because there are other human beings we want to communicate with, etc. So this is what we want to do. So basically, what is our priority in SFL is the social dimension. Now, if we look at cognitive linguistics, the priority is rather to see what's happening in the mind of the language user when he or she is using language. So that was the major challenge. That was the main thing that I was really all the time thinking about. But I was also thinking, but we are dealing with the same human being. Whether that human being is social or inside himself or herself. So that's the same person. So why do we have this distinction? And I think the transdisciplinary approach is really a good asset to overcome all these divisions that we have made, which are positive in a way because divisions would allow us to study things deeply, but sometimes that might keep us from seeing the whole picture. So trying to go a step back and have a look at things, we can see that actually it's I kind of the metaphor that I have in mind is that if we think about a picture and in SFL, we would have the person talking to so many other people, so around them. And if we zoom in, we will see what's happening in the mind of the language user, and that will be cognitive linguistics. So basically, they are not really contrastive. I mean, they are not really against each other, but rather complementary in a way. And this is what I tried actually to do in the chapter. I tried to focus on the idea of embodiment because we think that embodiment, as we define it as we're having the language that we have because we have the bodies that we have, means that it is mind and body. But what much of the metaphors coming from embodiment are actually between these 2 points, between being universal, sometimes, for instance, having the journey metaphor, which is universal, the container metaphor that I talk about in the chapter, which is almost universal, but at the same time, allowing variations which come from culture and come from social context whatsoever, okay? So this is the point that I was trying to do in the chapter. So basically, I would really think that human meaning making cannot really be separated into purely cognitive, purely social. It's the same mind, and we're doing all things together at the same time.
Yeah, and I think your chapter does bring those together beautifully. So, you know, it does lead to thinking about like you said, you know, what's universal about the way we think, the way we view the world, but also the variations that exist, which are often, right, coming from a cultural perspective. And bringing these two theories together allowed you to focus, right, on context. And so my question is, it's both what are the challenges of bringing those two theories together in looking at context? Well, I think the gains are fairly clear, and you've mentioned those. So let's focus on the challenges of crossing those disciplinary boundaries within linguistics.
Yeah, the challenges may be coming from probably, I would say in metaphor, I was trying to read previous research, and I was trying to attend conferences whatsoever. And at the beginning, all the research was kind of trying to see how to express anger, how to express whatsoever, etc. But little by little, there's now a growing body coming into or trying to highlight the importance of studying metaphor in context. And the challenge is that people wouldn't really accept other methodologies. I think this is what Anne has been talking about. So basically, I was trying to argue, and I used in my chapter one example, which can be treated from a grammatical point of view, lexicogrammatical choice, and from a metaphorical point of view, and trying to argue that we can apply the methodology on studying metaphor. And studying metaphor in context is very much important, because there is very much more to know about metaphor, to discover about what is there, what it is used for in context, because it is a rich way of meaning making. But yes, it is challenging, because yes, probably people in metaphor wouldn't really accept the idea of trying to apply or coming up with a new methodology. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's so true. Yeah, we go to our conferences and we feel comfortable, but if we go to cognitive linguistics, or if cognitive linguists come to ours, and so that's, I think, an area where we really do need to do some work as linguists, is be more accepting, I think, as Anne was saying earlier, of each other's way of doing work and what we can learn from each other. So thank you for that, Fatma. So I'll hand it over to Akila now.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would start first of all by thanking ESFLA for organizing this nice event. Thank you, Anne, Fiona, and Diana, for the nice work you've been doing with these seminars. That's a good opportunity to see people around the year. I mean, around the year, not only in conferences. So thank you very much. And I would also like first to thank all the contributors to the handbook, and more specifically, and even if I haven't repeated that enough, my co-editors, Anne, Liz, and Rebekah, and tell you that working on this handbook was really an enjoyable experience. I mean, at all levels, both academically, personally, socially, at all levels, and that was really very nice working with you. Now, I would thank Arran for handling his chapter, because we've been discussing some issues. And in the questions today, I will get back to the role of language and linguistics, something that Liz and Anne touched upon earlier. The role of linguistics in transdisciplinary research. And I'll take you back to 1987 with an important, to a quote by Halliday, which I find very important, where he says, he was talking about, and that was in a conclusion of his chapter on language and the order of nature. I'll put the reference later in the chat. And where he says, if there is to be a science of sciences in the 21st century, it will have to include linguistics, at least as a partner, and perhaps as the leading partner in the next round of man's dialogue with nature. So linguistics in the man's dialogue with nature, so part of the ecosystem. And my question, Arran, how do you agree with that? I guess that you would agree with that. And more specifically, what contribution do you think linguistics can make to transdisciplinary research, especially with the global challenges we are facing in the 21st century?
Great, thanks. Thank you very much for that question. And it's good that you started with Halliday, because, well, that's why I'm with you today, because my area is ecolinguistics, and really Halliday started ecolinguistics in its modern sense. So it was that work that you mentioned, but most specifically, he gave a speech at the ESFLA conference in 1990. And he was saying in that speech, what he said in that quote, that language has an incredible power to shape how we think about the world. And the current language that we use is shaping the world in a way that is destructive for our future. That the way we're thinking prioritizes economic growth. It sees nature as just an object, a passive object to be exploited. And he came up with this idea that we need to take that into account as applied linguists and to make that fundamental to what we do. And before that, ecolinguistics was in a bit of a lost phase where people were using it metaphorically just to talk about sociolinguistics, really. So they were using language as a metaphor to talk about the behavior of different languages. So the ecology of languages is about how languages relate to each other and the social environment. And Halliday came in and he said, well, no, actually, we really need to look at these problems, ecological problems, because we don't have a future without them. So linguistics plays a very important role in ecological issues. And my latest research sees stories and narratives as actually part of ecosystems themselves. So recently I changed my title to Professor of Narrative Ecology. And that's because I realized actually that I wasn't so interested in language. Okay, so Halliday, obviously with his systemic functional linguistics, he was focusing very much on the level of grammar in his speech. And that's where I started. And yeah, a lot of my analysis was about grammar. But then I realized that it's not so much the grammar that is important, it's how the grammar of the English language is used to tell stories. So that is where I started to differ from Halliday, and I ended up just dropping the linguistics altogether. But it's still important. I mean, stories are told through language, and they're told through images, and they're told through the design of buildings, and they're told through films. And so for me, it's the story that is central. And then linguistics can give us some tools to reveal the stories that we live by, the stories that underpin our unsustainable civilization. And when we reveal those stories, then we can judge them. Are they destructive or are they beneficial? And of course, most of the stories that underpin our current civilization are destructive. And so then we have to search in cultures right around the world to look for inspirational news stories to live by. And that's also where linguistics is very important, because traditional and indigenous cultures will be using a wide range of languages, and these languages have particular affordances for how they allow you to say things. And then we look at that and we look at, well, how can we use the affordances of the English language to convey some of these stories? So that's how I started with those words from Halliday, and I've been doing that ever since, but I've been getting wider and wider until I see myself as transdisciplinary, but completely. I'm not a linguist. I call myself a narrative ecologist, but that doesn't really exist. I just made that up. I'm really an activist rather than any kind of academic.
Yeah, and you nicely show in your chapter that in order to be an activist, you need to start. I mean, you started with grammar, then you moved to discourse, and then to narrative. And I find this transition really, really very interesting. And now, which leads me to the second question about this transdisciplinary movement. And you have just described yourself as an activist, not as a linguist. Now, when we talk in terms of disciplines, okay, now in your chapter you describe ecolinguistics as a movement, as a transdisciplinary movement rather than a discipline. And my question here is about what distinguishes a transdisciplinary project from interdisciplinary collaboration. Okay, I mean, is it still in the locus of disciplines, or does it go out of this locus of disciplines? And if so, what are the challenges that arise when we scholars try to work across the disciplines? I mean, there should be some challenges, and you should have experienced some of them, I guess. So what type of challenges arise when we try to work in interdisciplinary collaboration across the disciplines? Thank you.
Yeah, this is a great question. So for me, transdisciplinary, it starts with the problem or the opportunity. Now, we tend to talk about problems all the time, don't we? We got problems about racism and sexism and environmental collapse. And quite rightly, a lot of what we do focuses on solving those problems. But there's also the opportunities to build a better world. And so there's also that positive side. But so we start with the problems and the opportunities. We don't start with a discipline. And then we say that what do we need to draw on if we're going to reach those opportunities, bring them into being, and deal with the problems. So what disciplines do we need to draw from? And of course, linguistics is one of those disciplines, and so is scientific ecology, and so is film studies and media studies and cognitive science and psychology. It doesn't matter. We draw on systems of knowledge which are useful for us to address the issues and to address the problems. I mean, so for me, I have a degree in computer systems engineering, a degree in speech and natural language processing, degree in human ecology, degree in linguistics, and one in education as well. So, that really helps me to just be able to step out of things a bit. And then try and synthesize and bring these disciplines, these knowledge systems together in ways that help address the issues. That's the key thing. And I say it's a movement because it's just got a simple message. Ecolinguistics has a simple message that the ecological crisis that we are facing is an existential risk, and there's also fantastic opportunities available if we start reflecting very carefully on the ecosystems that life depends on and the trajectory that we have towards protecting or destroying those ecosystems. So it's a movement because what we're saying is that linguists, you are ignoring these ecological factors, and they're relevant to everyone. We all live in ecosystems. And if you're doing critical discourse analysis, then one of the reasons why people are suffering is because their environments are being destroyed. So you can't separate like the oppression of people from the destruction of the environment around those people. That all linguists need to think about the ecological systems that life depends on. So that's the movement. It's an activist movement. We're saying, everyone needs to think of it. So it doesn't have a specific methodology. It really is just that one thing. Don't forget about the animals, the plants, the forests, the rivers, and the ecosystems that life depends on.
Exactly. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. I really like your chapter, and I invite everybody here to read Arran's chapter. It's beautiful. It's wonderful, both in terms of content and in terms of narrative style. It's unconventional academically, but it is really wonderful to read. Thank you very much, Arran. Now I give the floor to Rebekah. Thank you, Arran.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akila. And thank you to our entire editorial team. It was really a joy to work with everyone. And to all our authors, thank you. We had authors from around the world on this book. And it was an absolute pleasure to read everybody's work. So our last section focused on language and technology. And here I want to turn to Elke Teich, who looked in her work at... So Elke, as I understand, you're working very often with computational linguists, and in fact in a computational linguistics group by and large. And in your chapter, you discuss some of the work that you've been doing as part of that. And you focused in particular on information theory. And you were using information theory as a way of describing language that can be shared across traditions and different traditions that need to work with language. So what is it about information theory that makes it work so well across these traditions, to your mind?
Thank you very much, Rebekah, and thanks again to all the wonderful editors of this volume. It's a lot of work, and I really appreciate it, and I think it came out great. So I'm just not sure how much people know about information theory. So I don't know. I would have a slide I could share just to explain briefly what it is. Would that be okay? Anne? Yeah, okay, so I'll try it. Let me see. Freigeben. Okay, here you go. Can you see something? Can you see it? It's not, okay, it's not full screen, but it doesn't matter, right? You can see it. Okay. So, information theory. What is it? Well, the notion goes back to Shannon, Claude Shannon, to the late 1940s, when he formulated what is called information theory. And what it is simply is it's a way of measuring information in communication, right? So the stuff that goes through the channel. And the information is measured in bits, yeah? Binary digits. Now, the way it's formulated it has been formulated, and this is the original formulation, it's very simple. Information, also known as surprisal, as you can see in this formula, is the negative log base 2 probability of a unit in context. So it's all about probabilities, estimating probabilities and measuring through the probabilities the amount of information that comes across in a message. Now, when you look at this example, Jane read a book versus Jane bought a book, you can think about it. When you see Jane read you can probably guess already, it's probably a book. So the most likely thing, that's how this is going to continue, is book, right? Now, what that means is when you get book and you measure the information on book, there's not a lot of information coming across because you could have already guessed it. So it's not very surprising. So the surprisal or the information content of book in the blue example is low. But when you look at the second example, Jane bought a book. So somebody's starting to say Jane bought well, it's really hard to guess like what Jane would have bought, right? Could have been a book. Now, when you get book here, when you see it, when you read it, you get much more information than in the blue example because this is much more surprising. It carries more information. Okay? So this is information theory in linguistics. It's very simple. Okay? Now, the great thing about this is, and here I mean, you're asking about the connection also between functional and cognitive approaches. The great thing is that we know that the surprisal information is directly proportional to cognitive effort. Okay? So when you have the blue condition, Jane read a book, and you measure the reading time of somebody reading this sentence, the reading time on book would be very, very short, very low. Whereas when you look at the second example, it would be much higher. You can use other measures, you see, to estimate the cognitive effort. It could be reading times. You could do eye tracking, meaning you could see how long people remain on a particular item. You could also do EEG, measuring brain signals, and you would also get a signal of what is called surprisal. All right? So here's the connection. It's very simple. And now I think I can unshare, now that I've explained that. How do I do this? There you go. So, all right. So if you have questions about this later, I'm happy to answer. Now, so information theory is great because it's very simple. It's totally agnostic to linguistic theory, yeah, which means it's compatible with a lot of linguistic theories, except perhaps Chomsky, because he doesn't share the assumptions about language that are inherent in information theory. And it's very compatible with SFL. Because I think we would all agree, along with Michael Halliday, that the language system is essentially a probabilistic system. He said that very early on, I think in the 1960s, which means that when you consider the options in the system, they're not distributed uniformly, right? So choices are always skewed in the system, usually. And this is something that Halliday observed, I guess, by just looking at some texts and counting, right? But these days we can do this. How do we do this? Well, we can use computational language models. We can use computational language models to estimate the probabilities and assess the variation that we see. And we can apply this in very different fields. So we've applied it in my group, also together with Stefania, my co-author, to look at the linguistic change that happened in scientific language from the mid-17th century to today. Other people have applied it to look at register variation. Human language processing, of course, like I illustrated, right? Because surprisal is directly proportional to cognitive effort. So you can say about an expression how difficult it is to process by looking at surprisal. People have also used it in language evolution and typology. So it's a very, let's say, it's a very powerful tool. It's a very simple but very powerful tool. And like I said, it connects very naturally to cognitive processing, which makes it, very attractive also to cognitive linguistics. So maybe I leave it there because there's a second question.
Yeah, and the second question actually picks up on that. So
Okay.
You're using it as a bridge between the functional description and the cognitive explanation, and that in that sense, and in some ways as a proxy for cognitive load, right?
That's right.
So what opportunities does this potentially create for linguists, do you see? And also, I guess, what challenges do you see?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll start with the challenges. So like you said in the beginning, Rebekah, I have worked in computational environments most of my life, I would say, right? And recently, let's say in the last 15 years, not so recent, but in the last phase now, also with psycholinguists and psychologists. And when we started embarking on this information theory thing about 14 years ago, and maybe as background information, so we've had a big research center for 12 years, which is actually coming to an end, like at the end of the month, on the use of information theory in linguistics, called information density and linguistic encoding. And in the beginning, you could imagine so we're all kinds of linguists in this center. We're computational linguists, psycholinguists, psychologists, typologists, German studies people, which is also have their own kind of linguistics that they're doing. And in the beginning, it was very hard for some people. It was fairly easy for computational linguists. It was fairly easy for certain kind of psycholinguists because they knew about surprisal. But for many, it was very hard because they've never done an experiment. They've never built a computational model of anything. So you see what I mean? So, and in order to embark on it, to embark on it is really a big investment because you have to learn so how do you estimate these probabilities? So either you do an experiment and you get close probabilities of something, or you learn how to build a language model, right? So many people had to learn this, and that's a really big effort that you have to do, and you have to be aware of it. It's an investment. It doesn't come for nothing. So it takes a couple of years at least, right? But then the opportunities are really great because in that center, so we had, at any one point in time, we had 15 to 20 projects with 20 PIs, 20 PhD students, 10 postdocs, all working on this, right? Information density and linguistic encoding from all these various angles. So, so the opportunities are great because, and maybe I can relate back to what other speakers have said before. So it's more about how to create an environment where people like different people like psycholinguists and German studies people talk together at all, yeah, let alone work together. and that's the nice thing about information theory. So it's also a structural thing. It's okay, how do you create such an environment? But information theory gave us the opportunity to be able to do so. Once you can commit to it, yeah, you have to commit to it. So maybe I'll leave it there because, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And I will hand back to
me, actually. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Rebekah. And so because this is such an interesting discussion and it's so detailed, we actually planned 2 cross-panel discussions. We might skip to the second one. And we ask you all to be quite brief in your responses so that we can then open up questions to the audience. So
sorry, I just wanted to say anybody can respond, you know, not everybody has to respond, but okay, thank you.
And so the question that we plan to ask is, well, we'll take the second one. If linguistics is to contribute more directly to addressing some of the contemporary social and environmental challenges that we've been discussing for the last hour, what is one change that you would most like to see in how linguistic research is conducted, communicated, or valued? Do we have a volunteer to start the discussion, the response to this question?
Maybe I can start if you don't mind.
Yes,
because we have to leave on time. And it's also a point that's really in my heart in some sense. And other people have mentioned this before. It's language science, right? So some people say linguistics, but it's not the same. And Halliday made this point also very early in his writings and also in conversation, that what we need is a language science. And I don't want to interpret Halliday now, but I can tell you what I mean by it. So to me, language science, also after a lot of experience in working in the multidisciplinary fashion, interdisciplinary fashion, whatever you like to call it, it's language science is a multidiscipline to me. Yeah. So language science is all the different kinds of people, from psychology, from linguistics, from sociology, from computer science, who investigate language, who want to understand how language works, who want to understand how language is used either by humans or by machines, and how language works in communication. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think a lot of our structures, institutional structures, conference structures, you know, the structure of science, they're not good for this. Yeah. So we stick in these very narrow little corners that we come from, and we don't get out from there. We're stuck in these faculties and departments, and we don't get out because we compete for resources with, I don't know, with computer science or with physics and things like that. And that's all very unfortunate. I don't know how to improve it, but I can just really recommend to everybody work with a physicist, work with a computational person, work with a psychologist, and then, yeah, you'll have to see. And it's good.
Thank you very much, Elke. And I think, yes, it's also, this very much depends on which country in which we're working. and some countries
Absolutely.
really box up their disciplines more than elsewhere. But yes, who else would like to respond?
I'll go.
Yes.
So I like to take it from the lens of what each person can do, right? So not just what we need to do kind of abstractly. I think each of us could convene at our own particular university, convenings of people who study language right on that campus, right? So I'm talking about something here that is low budget, practical, there's logistics involved, but it's doable. Start to think about how you can organize your classes, the research agendas, think about what you could do at your university to promote the study of language. And it's funny, it sounds really simple, but I ask a lot of people to do this when I'm going around talking, and not many people haven't done that. They're like, oh, I know there's this person who studies language in this way over in this other department, but I don't really know them. I don't really talk to them. The coordination can go a long way. And yes, it takes time, but I think it's something that's doable. On top of that, I think what's really important is that we each start to think about something that we aren't necessarily educated or socialized into, is to think about what is our own budgetary or fiscal model for ourselves as an individual, but then also for the study of language in the way that we are centered. I think one of the challenges that linguistics faces is that we don't have these type of fiscal conversations about how we're actually going to support and finance the research, our students. What are we looking at in our department? So that you can hear this is the administrator, the associate dean, and me kind of coming through. And when we haven't had those conversations in as a discipline, or however you want to define people who study language, we kind of get left out and people just don't know how to do that. So that's something that, again, Becky and I have been talking about for a long time, because now we've moved into administration. Christine, who I work with a lot, she's at an administrative conference right now, which is why she couldn't join us. We have to start thinking about what we want that fiscal model to be. Are we going to raise finances by having more interest in our student population, right? So in the United States, that's called a butts and seats model, right? So doing classes and doing things that make people want to come, and that gives us resources. Are we going to have more orchestrated advocacy from our federal and state governments around funding and fiscal models? Or are we going to think about the ways that we do donation, development, and fiscal work? I've never been to a conversation about that in a linguistic space. I've been to many conversations about that at university and education spaces, but I think this is something that we really are going to have to take on if we want to be serious about being transdisciplinary, because our other colleagues just have different models from us about doing this and being savvy from this in our day and time. And this is real. We know that even the Linguistic Society of America is like trying to always raise money, but it's not something that its members can contribute to in a real and meaningful way. And as the higher ed gets defunded, it's going to just be even more prescient.
Thank you so much, Anne. Who else would like to jump in?
Well, I noticed that there are many comments in the chat. If anybody has a specific question at this point, feel free to type it in there. You can say if you'd like it to be addressed to a specific person or to open to the panel.
There's actually one for, there's one for...
I think there's one for Arran, yes.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. So you can go ahead, Akila.
Okay, good. So that's a comment in the chat addressed to Arran. Thank you for a very convincing talk about the grammar and ecological linguistics. Is it possible to view the ecological linguistics as part of the cognitive linguistics? That's the first part. So Arran, is it possible to view the ecological linguistics as part of the cognitive linguistics? And which linguistic data as a narrative ecologist do you use and analyze first and mostly? News, mass media, discourse, internet discussions? So which one you use in your discourse analysis? And by the way, do you think that special grammatical features in the ecological linguistics occur in the data in English language? And in other national languages, the data of ecological linguistics may be prominent rather than the lexical level. Thank you very much. These are questions. These are not questions, these are remarks. So Arran, feel free to interact or to react to these comments, questions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Yes,
so
please.
they certainly look like questions, and they got question marks. And as a linguist, when I see a question mark, I think it's a question. So yeah, so is it possible to view ecological linguistics as a part of cognitive linguistics? No, it's the other way around. That ecolinguistics is a movement which would say to cognitive linguists, you're doing something which is potentially relevant to the ecological systems that life depends on. We would encourage you to use your cognitive linguistics to examine these problems. And also, the other thing with ecolinguistics is we want to reveal the stories that we live by. We will take any kind of theory from anywhere that is useful for revealing stories. And cognitive linguistics is very useful for that. So yeah, cognitive linguistics is part of ecolinguistics, but not the other way around. In terms of the data, well, personally, I look at poetry and I look at creation stories and I look at stories of the apocalypse and I look at films and I try to look at data which is kind of meaningful and inspirational. So I tend not to look at media reports because there's only so many media reports you can look at before you get very, very bored. But having said that, I also do look at environmental policy documents and corporate sustainability reports. So I guess it's both of those, but the ones I enjoy most are the inspirational ones.
The creative ones, you mean? I mean, sort of creative writing?
Yeah, the ones which are creative, because the stories we live by are leading us on a path towards destruction. And so creative uses of language can be good sources for new stories to live by. So we really want to like transcend traditional ways of using the English language and find very different ways of doing that. And yes, I want to look at traditional and indigenous cultures around the world and the poetry and the stories from there, because that's the most chance that we can find something very different.
Exactly. Yes.
And the next question, that's too complicated. It's obviously not a question, it's a comment. So thanks for the comment.
Yeah.
The last one is a comment, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on Kieran McGillicuddy's contribution, which suggests that we can look to see to other fields to see where SFL can contribute. And I think, Arran, that's the way around you're looking at it. You've got a problem, a field, an endeavor, a human endeavor, and then we can look to find ways that information theory or cognitive linguistics or systemic functional linguistics can help us address issues, problems that arise. And I feel like I just do need to mention, bringing back in Anne's earlier contributions, the work in education by somebody who draws on systemic functional linguistics in the United States, especially to bring in voices from other communities, not just the academic language, but Ruth Harmon's work based at the University of Georgia, and Jason Mizell as well, looking at how can we bring in other ways of doing, other ways of being through language, and help those people who do have these ways of using language from their communities, from their homes, to feel that those ways of using language are as highly valued as any other way of using language. And the work she's doing and others that she spearheaded, I think is really interesting. That's Ruth Harmon. Sorry, I just wanted to leap in with that because I think it's an important application too.
And Kieran also notes in the chat, she asks a question. Ariana, your last what you wrote in the chat, there's no question mark to it, so I'm not sure if it's more of a reflection that you're sharing. So I'll
it's
Kieran,
a question. It's actually a comment that is intended to ask for opinions.
To introduce it. So I think it's to our whole panel. So as you have written, in the panelists' experience, stopping to prioritize verbal language above all other codes could help develop transdisciplinarity. I don't know why you're asking this question, Ariana, especially in the current media culture where human beings do not communicate only or mostly verbally. So in your experience, Ariana, this has been key alongside working with engineers and computer scientists, as Elke suggests. So who would like to talk about the multimodal side of the issues discussed so far? Because the debate has very much been about, or the focus has been on language.
Verbal language.
Up until now, verbal language up until now.
Yeah, though Arran did mention images as well, right? Telling stories, but
oh yes.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. When you're doing this kind of research, then you start off and you are noticing that the language is conveying these stories, but then the images are conveying stories in exactly the same way. And I guess that goes back to Lakoff and Johnson. It's like, actually, what we're looking at is not language, we're looking at human cognition. So I guess that when you start with linguistics, you inevitably end up with something broader. And then you can look at many other different semiotic modes, which are also communicating things in much the same way. And that does raise a question about linguistics as a discipline, because you could use the same techniques to analyze images as you do for analyzing language. So I don't know if anyone wants to just take that as a challenge. Why have a discipline called linguistics when the things we study are actually, prevalent in these other modes?
If I may add, can I?
Do.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that as linguists, whenever the word language is mentioned, we need to think about the broader sense of the word language rather than the narrow sense. So rather than language as verbal, if you're a linguist, normally the operational definition of language should be language as a social semiotic. So language as a meaning-making, through any mode, especially if we come from an ESFLA Halliday perspective. So the word language should be mentioned and defined in the broadest sense, taking all multimodal communicative means and modes. So maybe it's not all the time possible, or it's not all the time easy, because whenever we mention language, we have the tendency to think about human languages, about natural languages, about verbal languages. But I think that we need to broaden this perspective. This is, in fact, especially if we take a transdisciplinary perspective, so it's about broadening rather than narrowing down.
I'm going to jump in for a second because I think this comes back to what Anne Charity Hudley was talking about at the start, about who gets to call themselves a linguist. And I think we need to be as broad as possible about who gets to call themselves a linguist. Otherwise, we're defining ourselves out of existence and out of relevance when we're potentially needed more than ever before in history. Now we have very pressing social, environmental, economic issues that are all colliding, and we need to be as broad as possible in who gets to take part in those conversations.
Sorry to interrupt. There has been someone who's had Mohammed Al-Shanat. He's had his hand up for a long time, and I think we haven't noticed.
Go ahead, Mohammed.
Yes.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Ariana, for this. As a linguist from Gaza, I'm talking to you from my tent, and I think there is, I think from my experience, if this war in Gaza taught me anything, is that we should start to look at language as not a luxury thing, but as a means of survival. Now, during the first 40 days of the war in Gaza, all international journalists were evacuated, and over the course of the war in Gaza, most educated people, the vast majority, including journalists, writers, have been either killed, imprisoned, or injured, or unable to speak. There is no way that they can speak. So sorry, can you hear me? Someone is.
Yes.
Yeah, the burden is left on ordinary people to make themselves seen to the world. And in the camp I have been living, I have collected data from ordinary writings, people writing on the canvas of their tents, ordinary people, and on the bottles of their water bottles, their water bottles. They've been writing pieces of writings, mostly in Arabic, and using systemic functional linguistics, I have concluded that language should be seen as a means of survival. It's like oxygen. It's like something that is not like luxury, something that is inherently natural, and it has authority over everything else in the world. And I hope when circumstances allow, I will publish this article. But thank you very much for it's been perceptive thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. So we perhaps should wind up this discussion with the possibility of continuing it in other ways, very well with further publications, with further moments to really debate this. I would like to perhaps wrap this up by quoting the editors of the Routledge Handbook in their conclusion, where they talk about the fact that every problem is in some sense a linguistic problem. And you editors finish with a call to arms to deal with you quote the wicked problems of our time. So with this call to arms, we might end this panel today. I would really like to thank Anne McCabe. She was you put all this roundtable together. You did all the coordination between the different participants and all the groundwork for the questions that were asked today. And I'd also like to invite you all to stay tuned for our next ESFLA online event, which should be probably towards the end of September, where we'll also be dealing with transdisciplinarity, but also specifically transcultural research. So the idea of working within academic traditions and theories across different countries and cultures. And so I will say good night from Paris, good afternoon to Anne Hudley in the States, and to all of you. Thank you again for participating and attending this online event, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you so much, and good night from Paris.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
We'll be in touch.
Very much so.
Thank you, everyone.
And so we can stop recording.